of creating a more sustainable, environmentally sustainable reality of your building. What's the practical ways to manage that and create that? And these would be from practical stories and things that we work on a day-to-day basis. Let me find the clicker here. So let's talk about some learning objectives, because we are going to try to share some best practices with you today, give you some insights to leave with. Obviously, one of the best ways that we look at approaches in this area is to identify what's the best technology investments and align those with the mission of your business or the mission of your building, and keep those in perspective. Second, how to understand and right-size the technology spend so we don't go overboard, but also ensure that we get a practical return on investment from the investments that we're making in this space. Also talk about the real first steps toward regulatory compliance, how to achieve that end goal of reducing energy use, and also how do you also meet regulations. And then also share with you, just so as you go forward and go back home, know the risk, penalties, and the opportunity costs of having your leadership team not act. So the other thing I'm going to share with you today is, as a CEO, how do I view these approaches and how do I view these investments when they come to me? And that way you get a little feel for what our perspective is in this area. So I'm the CEO of Albero Energy. We are a leading independent building controls provider. We're technology agnostic. We work on these type of solutions on a daily basis. We have offices throughout the U.S. We have large offices here in Baltimore. And my background is I'm an engineer by heart. So I'm a finance guy second, but I'm an electrical engineer, and I've worked at Trane, and I've worked at Albero, and I started the controls business and the performance contracting business at Trane 20 years ago, so I'm really getting dated. But this is a space that I'm passionate about and happy to be here. So let's just first talk about the practical and stark realities of where we find ourselves in today. So there's really, we wanted to give you the spectrum of what are the perspectives of different stakeholders with respect to environmental responsibility. You know, we have the USBC, the U.S. Green Buildings Council on one end, which is the purest view, you know, that every building, thousands of them, need to be transformed, need to be built and avoided to avoid the strain on our supporting ecosystems. You need to be socially responsible, healthy, and prosperous. You know, there's 19 million buildings in North America, and 5% are LEED certified, right? So the purest view is everybody's got to do it. We got to get moving on it. Then you have the investor's view on the far right, and that's where we get into practicalities of environmental situation we find ourselves in could have a negative impact on the economy, on our investments, on growth, the physical risk and damage to our land and our buildings. I think there was 25 major, what we'd call catastrophic weather events in the last 18 months. The prior 18 months, there was 5. So we look across the world at what's happening to our climate. And so the transition here is really about how do we to protect our assets and how do we make that transition risk go down. So that's about resiliency and business uptime is how we view investments in environmental responsibility. And then, of course, we can't get through, I'll tap dance through this, but you can't get through the middle, which is the political view, which has become very polarized. And that's a political topic that's very divisive on both sides of the U.S. aisle. And this divide has grown greatly over the decade. That climate change doesn't matter, that there's certain issues that just don't exist. So we have a political divide, but that's the environment as we talk about today, and we need to be reflective of that and recognize that. From my perspective, there's really 2 areas that we should talk about today, and that's what's our responsibility as CEOs or as members of an executive team. You know, environmental responsibility needs to be first viewed as a business process. Teams need to be engaged. Data must be used for decision making and ensure our return on investment. And having the right internal management and controls are vital to ensure the integrity and impact of what we're working on. The whole goal here, as an executive, is to reduce the natural resources of energy, water, waste, and productivity, and that saves money, makes us more productive, makes us better competing, but also makes a better physical and safe environment. So there's a really good business case at the highest levels to be an environmentally responsible company. The company I run has 67% of its revenue is ESG revenue for its clients. So out of the several hundred million we deliver, 67% is working on environmental projects that have tangible events for our clients. So that means we have dual materiality in the ESG world, that not only are we reducing our footprint, but we're also helping our clients become more energy efficient in their buildings. And there's also productivity and other benefits around safety. That goes hand in hand. productivity without eliminating jobs. So this is all about being more efficient and being better with how we're managing our resources. So this is a slide that's interesting because every time I put it together, it grows. So this is the environment that we find ourselves in, right? Commitments and requirements are complex and they're not slowing down. So that is one slide you want to take back because this is the environment that we're working in if we're leading and managing buildings or if we're facilities managers. And there's a host of different ones that are emerging. The net zero buildings obviously is a commitment, not a requirement. That's setting targets for a combination of what? High efficiency and renewable energy generation. Of course, we have carbon emission regulations that are emerging, setting caps on emissions and requiring regulations over time. And I'm going to give you some specific examples. These are real, and they're state by state. Energy efficiency standards are probably ones that you could probably recognize and grasp the easiest, and that is existing buildings that undergo energy efficiency retrofits to meet current standards in cities, states, and towns. And then on the demand response side, you're going to see this grow because of the stress on our power grid and the acceleration of data centers, the acceleration of AI in data centers, the acceleration of crypto. You're going to see more regulations and programs that encourage you to participate in demand response programs when there's not enough power. Just to give you an example, in Texas, during the last power grid issue they had in Dallas, they paid a Bitcoin data center $28 million to turn off for 3 weeks. Because a Bitcoin data center consumes as much energy as 143,000 homes. So these are just some practical things to grasp in your head about what's happening. So demand response is going to be coming, and you can participate in those. And there's ways to do that. If your building's not being used or certain times, you can participate in demand response programs from your local regulated authority or non-regulated energy authority. Building performance standards, setting performance outcomes for energy use and emissions on existing buildings that require continuous improvement over time, and you have to demonstrate that you're improving that over time. And we'll say to ourselves, well, me as a facilities manager, I'm not really worried about that. We're going to flip this presentation a second and do it outside in. It's really not about us, it's about your tenants. Your tenants are being required to have reporting issues. They're required to demonstrate that they're improving their emissions. So your tenants are going to be demanding this of you, depending on the buildings that you manage. And then there's growing disclosure requirements at the global and state level for disclosing greenhouse gases and other environmental factors in the buildings that you manage. And so the bottom line is how we sort through this. There's commitments and requirements that add to operating and capital costs. That's coming at us, and we just have to figure out how we manage through that. And then the other thing that we're seeing is inaction can result in fines or customers becoming very dissatisfied, or customers will not do business with you. There are several bids now we can't bid unless we demonstrate we have an ESG strategy. So that's another part of the environment. Let me go a little bit deeper here. And just, and the slide here is already arriving in a town near you. Here's just 3 examples from Maryland, DC, and Washington State. So the state of Maryland has passed the High Performance Buildings Act. So that mandates that new public buildings or major retrofits or renovations funded by the state must meet specific energy efficiency and environmental standards. If you look at the DC benchmarking law, it requires owners of large commercial buildings to annually measure and report their energy and water consumption using a tool. So that's now mandatory. And then the Washington State Clean Buildings Act, 1257, is a performance-based energy framework using EUI targets based on usage and climate zone. The buildings must report and submit the report on its EU performance by deadlines. If you look at the common goal across all 3 states and coming at us is to reduce energy consumption, increase awareness of energy efficiency, encourage improvements in building performance, and reduce the overall environmental footprint of the buildings you manage. That's the common theme. Simply put on the right, reduce the energy intensity of commercial buildings. That's about as simple as we can possibly state what some of these rules are. And these are growing across the U.S. Be aware of them, but those are future obligations for us who manage buildings or who are doing retrofits or installing building controls or upgrades. Okay? Practical, coming at you, more coming to a town near you is the message. And the other thing is essentially every state and law has some variation of regulations, but the common goal is what's stated on the bottom of the slide. So let's start talking about some practical realities. As building leaders, building managers, we have to start figuring out how we can practically use data and not get overwhelmed with complex systems and boiling the ocean. But as managers, we need to use data to do two things. One is quantitatively report in an audible way. There's a lot there. But that is, what is our ESG compliance and disclosures for your organization and your tenants' organizations? And then second, as building managers, how can we use data to accurately manage our business and actively manage our buildings? And those are the two categories that I would break up data into. Now, on the quantitative reporting, it's about having a baseline use in your buildings, and often now on a tenant-by-tenant basis. So not just the whole building, but what's happening with your tenants, and then providing them also with an understanding of what year-over-year resource reduction metrics you're going to manage to. So I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. Baseline your building by tenant, year-over-year resource reduction metrics, and then cost savings by making better use of those resources. How do we actually optimize and use those resources more valuable? And then understanding where the spike in resource use and cost is, either due to system failures, rate increases, anomalies, unexpected use of budget versus performance. And then what are the root causes to offset or address those spikes that you see? That way, that just takes out costs and also provides a more resilient business model for you managing your buildings. So, but let me not overwhelm you here. Ultimately, we're in the business of having a safe, comfortable, efficient, and reliable building. That's our job, okay? We're not in the business of being an ESG disclosure business, so we have to understand the practical realities of what's coming at us. But this is probably the most simplest slide I can think of the challenge, how to approach it, and then don't lose perspective of what your real mission is. So one of the themes of today is keep it simple. We don't need to be a data scientist to do this work. In fact, we'll talk about why it's a mistake to try to take on more than you need to. Keep it simple. Know what's essential, to your business and to the buildings that you run. Understand the results you're looking to achieve, so set those goals and year-over-year goals. And then make sure you have the right controls partner, BMS partner, energy engineer to make sure you're keeping your approaches simple, your projects are simple and practical. And don't get and avoid the words enterprise, avoid the words of complex MSI projects. It's just not worth it right now. And we'll go over why that's the case, unless you're really some sophisticated pharma company. Okay. You already have a lot on your plate. I wrote that. And so we have to be practical about what we need to do, as leaders. So here's 3 recommendations: making sure what your projects are and your investments are right size for your automation and your occupants and tenants. Recognizing that many will have public reporting requirements and also continuous improvement targets. So they have to be able to report and they have to be able to demonstrate continuous improvement. And then know how to manage your data. I break it up into 2 simple buckets. Break it up on the supply side and then break it up on the demand side. And you need to be aware of both, and that provides a very good comprehensive approach that's simple. And then the last thing is that uptime and resiliency. When you do all this, there's a way you can look at all this data to make sure your buildings are resilient, preserve its uptime and continuity, and making sure that you're pleasing your tenants and the goals of what your tenants are. But building resiliency and business resiliency go hand in hand. If we do the first 2, we can then make the building a little bit more resilient and performing well. So let's go a little bit deeper into the first one, emerging questions that are now becoming required. So how do we right-size that building automation reporting and service needs? So first of all, it's fundamental, but let's just go through it. Taking a step back and looking at how your building is actually being used, who is occupying your building, and are you prepared for continuous performance improvement? So obviously, depending on how your building's being used, there's different uses. Right-size your building and process control capabilities based on the tenants. More complex, you need more staff or maybe outsourcing. With respect to who's occupying your building, if tenants or occupants are public or mid to large private companies, they're going to have reporting requirements. So you have to maybe do some sub-metering and data management required on how your tenants are actually performing and utilizing their space. You want to do that to provide a more accurate environmental data to your tenants for their ESG reporting. So flip it around, let's find out what pressure they're under. And of course, the reporting needs to be auditable and third-party assured. to meet most requirements. So have the third party just validate, what you're doing. Just like when I quoted, 3/4 of our revenue is for sustainability projects, we had that audited from an outside party. So we have to back up your claims when you're reporting. And then the last category we talked about, it's so establish the baseline by tenant and then provide a pathway for continuous improvement on the key metrics that are most important. Maybe it's reducing energy efficiency, et cetera. So they can explain the environmental impacts they have and what stories they're using that have decreased them. And so your systems must be able to continuously commission, service, or manage that data or demonstrate that you're making progress on your goals. It's about as simple as I can keep it on number one. And then we talked about managing data. So I got it in 2 buckets for you. The first one is on the demand side, analytics, and this is simple. This is focused on the most critical to tenant satisfaction and environmental sustainability issues within the building. So I just broke it up into 3 areas. One is on the demand side, understand the energy, where it's going, the real-time energy demand versus its expected use. That's how you're going to get the different colors. You had a budget. How is it performing versus budget? And they have a power heat map. This is just basic stuff. Tenant space comfort, and then flag the worst performing equipment with anomalies or warnings. Why are things consuming? What is why are these air handlers my most expensive air handlers out of my whole group? How much are my operating costs on my chillers? We talked about that earlier today. Are they now becoming greater than the replacement cost? But having that understanding on the demand side, what's happening with the power that you're consuming. Once you understand your demand side load, you can then do things to procure better, manage it better, but then you can go to the other side and talk about how you might improve that. So I just want to make sure that these are actually demand side. Okay, supply side. This is about aggregating and analyzing your utility bills for spikes. This is a simple utility module that looks at negative impact, unexpected spikes, unexpected usage. This is very straightforward. You can use simple technology or even machine learning to scrape and analyze your utility bills and identify anomalies and system faults, preempt major maintenance requirements, and guide energy procurement decisions, including the need to buy renewable to offset spikes. But have the right audit trail of energy use on the supply side. So understanding what's coming in, understanding the anomalies, scrubbing your bills. This is a simple data module, demand module that just scrubs and scrapes your utility bills and say, are you purchasing power at benchmark and where are your anomalies? So now you know what's coming in, and on the other side, you're going to decide how you're going to reduce the stuff that's coming in. How do you reduce that load? So simple analytics on the supply side, simple analytics on the demand side. And let's put that all together now and talk about what the benefits are. At the end of the day, we want to seek to minimize disruption in a building. We want to make sure that the building is sustainable and efficient, and we want to be able to transform or improve it over time. And that's the goal here. If you look at the top, material business issues for executives that are leading buildings or managing buildings, it's about what? Business continuity. So can we maintain our buildings and make them run well? We're worried about cyber. We're worried about uptime in your buildings, keeping the building up and running, managing risks, and making sure you have the right talent and workforce in your teams. And then the role of building managers, my view as a CEO is how do you prevent, detect, and remediate disruptions that are critical to your building? That's the number one goal. And then manage those assets for what? Uptime, cybersecurity, and then obviously have an improvement plan to make sure you're continuing to improve the building. And then last, crisis management processes before, during, and after a disruptive event. Have you done your dry runs? Right? And so, we, once a year, when everything goes bad, how do you keep the building? Where do you go? How do you run it? Is it a BRP or a DRP? Making sure that you have those practices in place so if something really happens. And so it wouldn't be unusual, to ask these type of questions. Where does your building data live? Hope it's not in a server in the closet on the weekend, right? Can be managed off premises to give you greater access, analytics, and security. What's your crisis management call tree when there's a problem in your building? Is it documented and automated? Goes to technician 1, technician 2, goes to supervisor, goes to facility manager, goes to building manager, goes to an OEM. What is that tree so that you can manage and improve the performance and uptime of your building with good redundancy. And then coming out of here on this category is how are you managing your critical alarms? And you know what those are, and you prioritize them. So if you have 1,000 alarms in this building here with what? Fire, lighting, HVAC, door access, let me keep going, right? Critical turnstiles. What are the most critical alarms, and how are those managed, and are they managed differently, in your building? Water in a server room is a bad thing on a weekend. So do we have a water alarm on the floor? Okay, those are sort of things. So the most critical alarms, I think, are also good. So this is a really good topic to think about when you think as your role is to prevent, detect, and remediate disruptions, as facilities managers. I thought we would talk a little bit about technology because we're getting bombarded down in the halls downstairs on new technology. And I thought I'd just put a few things in perspective. New building technology is tempting, but it's risky. Align your choices with your business continuity and your environmental plans first. Keep it simple, and we'll share with you why you want to do that. Over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we thought we'd reflect on who were the winners and who were the losers in technology coming to promise you great things. And since we're technology agnostic, we can talk about these. So what are the winners, and why did they win? Over the last several years, alarm management has progressed, and it works. It's IoT enabled. It can monitor critical alarms, and it can notify you when there are issues. So having a great IoT enabled monitoring critical alarms is really good. And then most critical building systems are addressed and maintained in real time. So those are the two things that have worked. So alarm management's a thumbs up. That's working well. It's proven, and it can really give you more insight into what's happening to your building and react to it. FD&D, fault detection and diagnostics, when done right, has been a winner. But it's having basic diagnostics is key. And so an example would be, an air handler typically runs for 8 hours per, day, and it burns this much. It's been running for 14, and it's burning that for the last 2 months. Okay, that's a diagnostic that says there's something wrong with this device somewhere in the building that you may not know about. So FD&D has been a winner, and it's provided meaningful help to troubleshoot and optimize performance. We're starting to see targeted AI and ML applications work, and that's particularly in the area of energy utilization and preventing costly repairs in an event of a catastrophic failure. So that's machine learning, simple AI. It's also used in data scraping. It's used in a couple areas. But that's starting to work as long as it's targeted. So the losers, this was fun to look at, and I can give you example after example of the losers. The first one was pointing out problems but not doing anything to solve them. So a lot of the FD&D without diagnostics it's not really very good. The patient's on the ground, he's having a heart attack, but you're not going to do anything about it. You're going to argue about it. Master systems integration, the grand of all, plays is to integrate every disparate system, every interoperable system, every linkage into a single, pane of glass. That has struggled for several reasons. One is the complexity of the projects. Two is the lack of interoperability of the projects. And also obsolescence, as different versions of what you've integrated change, different software versions, different technology versions, it's difficult to keep up and keep that program going. And the last one, which is probably the most prominent, is the early smart building technologies. There's a lot of losses there, like lawn talk or lawn walk, or lawn works. That's a great example of a complex low voltage system with custom interfaces, custom hardware. That's an example that's failed miserably. That's because of limited interoperability, high cost, and unclear ROI. There's early platforms in the Niagara platforms that were promising enterprise plug-and-play capability way too early. And then you had everybody else jumping in, doing enterprise solutions that are going to solve everybody's problems. And those failed early too because the technology maturity, reliability issues, but also just the ability to integrate and interoperate all these disparate systems. So those are the failures on the right. Things are getting a little bit better, but the left is where fault detection with diagnostics, you're going to see some very good, simple analytics packages now. If it requires you more than a few minutes to understand what the salesperson's telling you, move on. Let's keep it simple. That's the most, and we've deployed thousands of projects this year, last year alone in this area, and the ones that went the best were the simplest ones. Easy to get in, get them up and running, easy to understand what's happening in your building, move on, as opposed to taking on more complex projects. So align your building technology choices to your business mission, but keep it simple, and take the proven stuff first. Don't take the risk on your shoulders. So I am going to open up to questions in a second, but I'm going to just give you 3 takeaways. I hope that there's some clarity here on the journey that we're on together. One is obviously understanding your supply side and your demand side with simple analytics. That'll give you a lot of insight to what's going on in your building. And do both, because then you know what's coming in, you know what your demand's going out, how can you buy better on the supply side, how can you reduce the demand side load. Got both in hand. Environmental sustainability is not going away. You saw the emerging regulations. You saw all the things that are happening by state. Your tenants are going to be demanding more about it. So it's important, and so is uptime when linking your building to your business. So I think it goes hand in hand. You got to do both. Your core job and then the environmental sustainability around fundamental reporting, setting up some simple KPIs, and then demonstrating over a period of time how you're improving on those KPIs or what you're doing to reduce or improve the KPIs that you select. And last, keep it simple, practical solutions as commitments, and then remember that requirements and compliance are growing more complex, so the simpler system you get in and start learning, the better. So that's where we are. I'll open it up to questions, but this is available. Obviously, it's going to be videotaped. It's also available on PDF, but it's the most practical thing I can give you for advice today. Any questions before we wrap up and go downstairs? Okay. Sounds like church. All righty, guys. Thanks for your time, and I'm here for any questions afterwards, okay? Thank you very much.